Let's start at chapter 4, verse 2. So this is a description of the day of the Lord.
Chapter 4 of what?
Isaiah. In that day, the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land shall be the pride and glory of the survivors of Israel. And he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called holy. Everyone who has been recorded for life in Jerusalem, when the Lord shall have washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and cleansed the bloodstains of Jerusalem from its midst by a spirit of judgment and by a spirit of burning. Then the Lord will create over the whole site of Mount Zion and over her assemblies a cloud by day, and smoke and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For over all the glory there will be a canopy and a pavilion. It will be for a shade by day from the heat, and for a refuge and a shelter from the storm and rain. So the Shekinah as a symbol of the end time. So the implication here is that the eschatological prophet has appeared and the day of the Lord has dawned. So that's extremely Transfiguration from when approached from a sort of a perspective of end time theology or end time prophecy is extremely significant, since it, particularly if we look at premillennial dispensationalism in our among our separated brethren, they distinguish 7 periods of salvation history, and all of them are disconnected. So one period sort of crashes and burns and ends in failure, and a new period starts up. So the period of Jesus' ministry, Jesus was sent to bring the Israelites to a knowledge of God and to restore the relationship of God with the Israelites. And supposedly he failed in that. That crashed and burned. Jesus got himself crucified. And so the church age with Gentiles started. It's discontinuous. That is going to end in the rapture when believers are taken up into heaven to spare them the great tribulation. So there again, something has failed dramatically. And then we have Christ coming and reigning for 1,000 years in a rebuilt temple, which brings the people, the Israelites, back to God. And then comes the second coming. So those are all discontinuous events. What we see from Matthew is that history is a continuous event, that history is typological. And then we see that much more carefully and much more closely, much more precisely articulated in the work of St. Vincent of Lérins, when he outlines what history means and what continuity and discontinuity within the historical process means. So what all of this means is that the premillennial dispensationalism, which is really sort of the major end times theology among Christians in our own time, is completely at variance with the understanding of history of the church, completely at variance with end time, the traditional end time theology of the church, completely at variance with the way in which we know that history as a process unfolds completely at variance with the way in which we know that God works and is active in human history. So that's extremely, extremely significant. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
Did that resonate with anyone?
Yeah.
So are there comments or questions about the?
Oh, the problem with keeping your microphone off is that when you talk, you just keep talking, but nobody will hear you.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The problem with having your microphone muted is nobody can hear you. So I've been started asking questions, and I go, oh, they can't hear me.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So I guess, I always get lost when you say premillennial, because I don't know what that means. And then it's like premillennial dispensation, and last time I think you said
I'm sorry, you're breaking up, Colin.
okay. I don't know what the microphone is. Can you hear me now?
Do you have your hand underneath the phone or wherever the microphone is?
I don't even know where the microphone is.
Oh, okay. Now you're better.
Well, I think I had a piece of paper, a notepad on top of the microphone.
Oh,
That didn't help. So anyway, I was just wondering, can you go back over what premillennial and what premillennial dispensation and what premillennial manifestation is?
Dispensationalism divides salvation history into 7 dispensations or periods. A basic principle of typology and a basic principle of the historical process, as St. Vincent of Lerins outlines it, is that periods have to be related to one another. There can't be a period progresses and gives rise to a new period. So the new period is born from the roots of the old period. There's a certain continuity involved at the same time that there's a discontinuity. So one way of looking at it is that there's quantitative change, and at some point that quantitative change becomes qualitative and a new period is inaugurated. So these 7 dispensations are unrelated to one another because God's plan has failed. Although they wouldn't say this, we can, go on to say that from a theological perspective, what they're actually arguing is that God is an incompetent bungler who's stupid and can't manage to, foresee what's going to happen, even though he's supposedly omnipotent. That's my own take.
You're saying premillennial dispensation is a philosophy or a theology held by some?
It's a predominant view, particularly of evangelical Christians.
Okay, so it's a view. All right.
Right. Of salvation history, and particularly the end times. So premillennial means that Jesus comes before the millennium. The millennium is, and then there's also a difference in what is the millennium. So in premillennial dispensationalism, Jesus comes to reign on earth with the Israelites, with the Jews, in a restored godly nation of Israel, in a restored theocratic Israel for 1,000 years. In traditional Christian theology, that 1,000 years is the church age. We're living in the 1,000 years now. It's not, as St. Augustine points out, it's not a literal 1,000 years, 1,000 years is simply a symbol for a long period of time.
And they believe that Christ is actually with us, right?
Christ is with us in the form of his church.
Right.
Right. So
We don't have to wait for him.
we don't have to wait for him. That there will be a second coming,
Mm-hmm.
but no one knows the day or the hour. That could be in a couple of minutes. That could be tomorrow. That could be in 2,000 years. That could be in 10,000 years. Nobody knows the day or the hour, and we're not to look for signs for it. We're to be prepared for it. So
We're actually in this period of 1,000 years right now that pre-millennial dispensation believers think hasn't occurred yet.
right, right. They see that 1,000 years as Christ reigning with the Jews in a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem.
In fact, they're trying to get money to rebuild the temple.
Which in turn requires destroying the Dome of the Rock, which will, the Dome of the Rock is where in Islamic belief Muhammad was ascended, taken up into heaven. So the Dome of the Rock is a sacred place in Islam, and the destroying it to rebuild a temple where animal sacrifices, incidentally, will resume, which is just totally absurd and ridiculous. So, this premillennial dispensationalism is, it's been condemned by the church as heretical. And it is heretical. It fundamentally violates almost everything that we know about salvation history, about the activity of God in history, and about the church and about the second coming. So, questions, thoughts?
And when you say the church, you mean the Catholic Church as well as the Orthodox churches?
Yeah, in a general way, all Christian churches, whether we think so or not, we're living in the church age, the 1,000 years.
No, I mean the statement about being heretical.
Yes, yeah. Catholic and Greek Orthodox churches.